Hi everybody, welcome again to our daily reading for A Trail of Broken Dreams. See yesterday for a recap at the beginning of the video as to where we're at. We're going to be beginning with October 12th, 1862, very early. I cannot sleep. I have a gut feeling that tells me Father is not really dead. I wish Joe and his gut were here, or Henry or Talbot. I have no one. I overheard the priest tell Mr. Mallard that the man who had told him about Father said Father's claim was 2 miles down the creek and was notable for 2 trees having fallen across each other to form a large X. Father Alfred also told Mr. Mallard that it was rumored that the claim was a good paying one. Later, I am hiding behind a tree stump up on the slope above town. The sky is lightening now, and soon I will be able to see well enough to walk. I dash these few sentences off to give me courage. I am scared at my own daring, dear diary, but I need to see Father's claim for myself. I put on my old clothes and took my packs and crept away from Mrs. McManus's in the early morning hours while it was still dark, so no one would see me leave. I placed the nightgown under the blanket on Mrs. McManus's spare bed to look like I lie there, in the hopes that she will think I am still asleep. My neck pricks all of a sudden, dear diary, like it does when you feel you are being spied upon. I best leave before I lose all heart. Late afternoon. Father is not dead. He is quite ill, but very much alive. I swear I cannot take any more of these shocks, and dear diary, Talbot is with me. He has gone to look around Father's claim. Yes, Father's. I found it. And him. I have so much to tell you. I waded through deep snow along the creek. The number of miners has thinned out, most returning south to winter, with only the miners with deep shafts that can be worked in winter or those desperate for gold remaining. I felt very lonely, and my neck still pricking, as if I were being watched, though no one was about, so I sang a song Mama used to sing to me when I was little, Aiken Drum. I just got to, and he played upon a ladle, ladle, a ladle, when suddenly a voice shouted, "And we thought Joe was a terrible singer. That's the worst wailing I've ever heard." It was Talbot. I didn't even care if it was proper or not. I gave him a great big hug. He was looking thin, and I asked if he'd been eating steady. Seems he joined up with a couple of men who promised him a share of their profits when they hit gold. I believe they took him because he was young and could work hard. They were digging a shaft, but it filled up with water and they never found any gold. Talbot was heading back to Richfield when he heard my singing. Despite the snow falling heavily, we soon found 2 trees that formed an X, and behind them a cabin. Talbot went in first because I was too scared of what we might find. He soon came out and told me there was a man in there, ill with fever. I was absolutely terrified to go in, but made my feet move, and there on a cot was Father. A thinner, bearded Father, thrashing about and twisting the blankets. I knelt beside him, and he opened his eyes. "Harriet?" he whispered. "Am I dreaming?" I told him it was really me. Even as I write these words, I am still amazed I found him. I had Talbot build up the fire as it was stone cold in there, and I quickly made Father some tea. I told him everyone thought him dead. He said it was his partner, Sam Simpson, who died of mountain fever and that he himself had taken ill a few days ago. He is sleeping now, and I have broth cooking for when he wakes. I didn't tell him about Mama because I worried about his strength. That can wait. I thought perhaps we should move Father to Richfield, but Talbot says the snow is too deep and the cold might make Father worse, and we should wait a day. I know Talbot is right, but I'm so scared something will happen to Father, and I couldn't stand to lose him, not now, when I've just found him. October 12th, 1862, late. I can't sleep. I'm so jittery. I listen to Father's breathing, and sometimes I think it is easier, and sometimes I think it is not. It snows heavily and steadily, Trees crack and fall beneath the weight of it, and I jump at every noise. I tell Talbot I heard footsteps outside, but he tells me it is nothing and to stop being a nervous Nelly. After I got the broth into Father and he fell asleep again, Talbot and I went and looked around the claim. There is a deep shaft which must have taken Father and his partner a long time to dig. There is a ladder in the shaft, but Talbot lowered me down in a bucket with the windlass. I was very excited, thinking I would see lots of gold. But nothing glittered. It was just cold, damp, and dark. I came back to the cabin to check on Father, though Talbot stayed a while longer. Father woke once while Talbot was still out, and he told me something, dear diary, that I do not know whether to believe or not, as the fever makes him ramble in his talk. He keeps saying he hid gold at the cross. I don't know what he means. I'm trying to decide whether or not to tell Talbot. October 13th, 1862, early morning. We found it. We found Father's gold. I was drifting off to sleep when suddenly I figured out what Father meant by at the cross. The two trees that mark his claim. I woke Talbot and insisted we go immediately to find it. He was too excited at first to go out in the snow and cold and dark, but when I told him we were hunting for gold, he perked right up. It took us a good hour, but we dug through the snow and found a hollow beneath the root of one of the trees, and there was the gold. The whole time we dug, my neck pricked, but Talbot said it was me being a nervous Nelly again. I told him I didn't like our footprints leading from the tree back to the cabin. He said he'd hide the gold again so I wouldn't have to worry. I'm waiting for him to come back now. October 14, 1862. What an exciting time we've had. I will write it all down so I don't forget. William will think he is reading an adventure story and will be pea-green with envy that it happened to me and not him. I can say this now that everything is over, but for a while I thought all was lost. Well, Talbot did come back, but not alone. John was with him, with a rifle pointed at the middle of Talbot's back. It seems John followed me to the claim. He was returning from the saloon's privy, which is the bathroom, and saw me leaving Mrs. McManus's house. He was the one that made my neck prickle. I knew someone was following me. Anyway, I told him I'd show him where the gold was if he left us alone and just let us get Father safely back to town. Thankfully, Father slept through the commotion. So, rifle pointing at my back and Talbot's, we waded through knee-deep snow to the shaft. My plan was that I would tell John the gold was at the bottom of the shaft, and when John climbed down the ladder to find it, Talbot and I would pull the ladder out and leave him stranded at the bottom. I was pretty proud of myself for that plan. Unfortunately, when we got to the shaft, John told Talbot to climb down and bring up the gold. I must admit, I hadn't allowed for that. Talbot wasted a bit of time fussing with the ladder and shooting hopeful glances at me, no doubt wondering what the heck my plan was and why I wasn't putting it into action. But my brain was in its worst burning turmoil of all time. Finally, there was nothing left for Talbot to do but to go back down the ladder. After a few minutes, he yelled up, "Lower the bucket, and I'll put the gold in it." John gestured for me to turn the handle of the windlass to bring the bucket up. I tried to pull up the bucket, but it was heavy going. Talbot had weighted it down with rocks, I found out later. I let the bucket slip back down and told John I couldn't get it up myself. He pushed me aside and took the handle, though he too found it hard going and was forced to lay down his rifle. I thought about grabbing it, but wasn't sure if I could shoot him if need be. And by then he told me to help turn the handle. We managed a few turns, but then the bucket stuck. John let go of the handle and leaned over the shaft and yelled at Talbot to see what it was caught on. In that moment, I let go of the handle myself and it flew about and caught John dead center in the back and he tumbled headfirst down the shaft. I was horrified. I thought I'd killed him. At that very moment, old Jackson and Mr. Mallard came up on snowshoes. I'm embarrassed to say, dear diary, that when they arrived, I began to sob. I couldn't even breathe. I cried so hard, thinking I'd murdered John. Talbot called up that John was out cold with a goose egg on the back of his head, but was breathing fine. He emptied the rocks and managed to get John into the bucket, and Mr. Mallard and old Jackson pulled him up. We all went into the cabin, the men dragging John, who was still out cold. When he came to, old Jackson asked him why he tried to steal our gold. John said he thought if he came back with gold, it would prove to Thomas that he wasn't a good-for-nothing. Seems that the rumors of Father's claim being a rich one had flown about town, and when John saw me leave Mrs. McManus's place, he decided to follow me. Old Jackson just shook his head and told John he was taking him back to Richfield to go before Judge Begbie. John's face paled so much to hear that, I thought he'd faint dead away again. Judge Begbie has a reputation for being harsh with those who break the law. While John pleaded with old Jackson and Mr. Mallard not to turn him over to Judge Begbie, I pulled Talbot aside outside the door. Talbot started to tell me how John had managed to grab the rope halfway down the shaft to slow his fall, and if he hadn't done that, he would be dead of a broken neck. But I wasn't really that interested. I mean, I'm glad John didn't break his neck, but I had a burning question for Talbot. Where was the gold? In the privy, of course, he said. The last place anyone would look. I told him that was perfectly disgusting. He said that everything was frozen in there. Frozen or not, dear diary, it is still disgusting. Remember, the privy is the bathroom. When we got back inside, old Jackson asked me what was I doing, upsetting everyone by stealing away in the middle of the night. I apologized and told them how badly I felt that I'd put them to so much trouble. It seems Mrs. McManus had left me to sleep throughout the day, thinking me grief-stricken, and only sounded the alarm in the evening when she went to wake me and found it was the nightgown sleeping, and not me. Mr. Mallard and old Jackson said they thought Father would do better back in town, so we got him bundled up, and they and Talbot pulled him back to Richfield on a makeshift toboggan. John was able to make his way back with us, though he stumbled a lot. There is a doctor here who told me that mountain fever is very dangerous and that I'm lucky Father has survived it. He does say that Father is on the mend, but will be very weak for a long time. So right now, dear diary, I am writing this in our room at the fancy French hotel. We are staying here for the winter until Father regains his health. The hotel is really not all that fancy. In fact, I would almost rather be back in the saloon, but I guess I won't be seeing the inside of that place for some time. I did, though, have a good bath and rinsed out my boys' clothes. Mrs. McManus gave me an old skirt of hers. I've grown so much walking over the mountains that I didn't even need to shorten it. Talbot is anxious to see his father, so he and old Jackson are leaving shortly to go to Victoria. I'm very sleepy, dear diary, and I will admit this hotel bed is soft. I think I am glad to not be traveling for a while. My feet are walked out, and my hand is falling off my wrist from writing so much.